dance around a little bit? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming for this informational meeting. I do want to set some ground rules. So we're here today. Tom Bauer is an architect who lives in the neighborhood and is working with us on developing a massing plan, which is answering the question of if we are building new buildings on this property, where could we make the things that we want fit on this existing property? And this is being done with a grant from the Trust. So I also want to thank the Trust for making this available. I'm Jacob Hathaway, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Identity Discernment Task Force, and I do want to put this within some context and lay some ground rules for the discussion. So the Identity Task Force is looking more broadly at several different options of ways that we could envision our future as a congregation. And some of those are growing, some of those are staying the same. It involves moving to other sites. There's lots of discussions that we are going to be having in the future. Today is not the day for all of those discussions. We've got an opportunity to talk to Tom. He's put a lot of thought into our existing properties and what our possibilities are at this site here. We're going to be having some of those broader conversations at 3 community meetings on October 1st at 10 o'clock, October 14th at 7 o'clock p.m., that's on a Wednesday, and October 28th at 12:30. Yep. October 21st. Thank you. Can't read my own handwriting. So I wanted to create that context to say I want to make sure that we're taking advantage of this time that we've got with Tom to get his feedback. Tom, I'll let you decide how you want to take questions and when. But we will interrupt folks and ask you to move questions that are for a different topic to these other meetings. All right? With that introduction, Tom, let's see. I'm real excited with the plans I've seen.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's nice to see you all. Can you all see around me? Great. I'm kind of tethered to the slide projector there. So anyway, what we wanted to show today, what we've been asked to do is kind of look at what are the options, what are things that we can do on your property here, and what just kind of thinking outside the box, just kind of analyzing what you have existing, what are the pros and cons of what you have existing, and how we can improve upon those things, and can we improve upon those on this property. So those are just kind of that's the kind of the thought process. What I thought we'd do though is first kind of think about, just what if, imagine if, and try to think in that way, and then we'll show you some potentials, and then what I was thinking is at the end of the presentation we'll have time for questions and answers. So as part of the what if we had education classrooms that were appropriately sized? What if we had education classrooms that had natural light and views, were flexible for multiple uses? What if they were education classrooms were in a spot where they could be convenient to accessible restrooms? What if we had social spaces that were adequately sized for multiple functions? What if we had social spaces that were separate from the worship as opposed to being right beside the worship space? What if we had social spaces that had appropriately and functional kitchens so that you could serve those multiple functions in the social hall? What if we had administrative offices that were sized for the use and need? What if we had administrative offices that provided the necessary privacy that you need? What if we had conference room and remote conference capability? What if we had those things? What if we had administrative offices that had fully functioning workroom? And imagine if we had a worship space that was equally enthralling atmosphere as what we're sitting in today. Imagine if we had a worship space that could have the capacity for 375 people at one service. Imagine if we had a worship space that met all the current energy and lighting technology energy and lighting technology qualities about that space. Imagine if we had a worship space that had the proper accessory spaces, narthex and that sort of thing. Imagine if we had a worship space that was fully accessible. And then imagine if we had a campus that was a park-like setting. You have all the ingredients of that here on this property. Imagine if we had a campus where we had proper auto and pedestrian ways, so that there's not a lot of crisscross, and so that you don't open your car door and bang into the next car because of the slope of the parking lot. Imagine if we had a campus with proper children's play spaces. And then imagine if we had a campus that had workforce housing, had the capability of having workforce housing incorporated into it, not only as a part of your ministry, expanding your ministry, but also as an income producer. So what we've done is when we imagine all of those things and think of all those things, we try to evaluate what you have existing and then what the potential is in the future. So obviously you know your site, and this is an aerial view of the site. Located prime location. The white dot is your site. Obviously, Green Hills shopping areas in the bottom left-hand corner. The interstate is along the top edge, and then its proximity to downtown and into universities and residential areas. Just probably couldn't get a more ideal site. We work with a lot of churches, and finding the ideal site is usually the big stumbling block. So you all already have that, we believe. And then you have 3 existing buildings on the property. The property is approximately 3.3 acres is the property size, and it's zoned R40 and R20, and really doesn't really affect the church because there aren't zones for churches, right? So churches are considered kind of an accessory use in a community. So really churches can be placed anywhere. They're kind of an exception to the zone. So anyway, the beauty of that is that anything that works for your ministry or is involved in your ministry can be are allowed within on your property for a church and in really any zone, but we happen to be R40 and R20. So that's our zone. We're as I mentioned, 3.3 acres, and anyway, so that's kind of the basics of the property and the technical aspects of the property. So the next thing we do is we look at what are your program needs? What do you have today, and what do you need in the future? So I'm going to enlarge this a little bit if I can. What we've done is we've gone through and we've analyzed what your existing spaces are within the church, and we've divided it into four things, into gathering, into worship, administration, gathering, worship, administration, and social. I'm sorry, gathering, worship, which is social, administration, and education. Those are the four key categories. So as we look at the gathering, sorry, I'm juggling 2 things, the microphone and the iPad at the same time. Sorry about that. So if we look at gathering, what we've included as part of the gathering is the social hall. That's the biggest aspect of the gathering. But also you have, if you can see here, and you may not be able to see that, but as you see, there are lots of different aspects of the social hall. You have the kitchen, pantry, the proper restrooms, that sort of thing. We approximately you have about 2,000 square feet that's kind of devoted to that aspect of your ministry. And what we're projecting is you need about 6,000 square feet for those things to properly function. So that would allow a seating capacity at 133 people. Right now, you have existing seating capacities about 100. Okay, so at 133 people, and then standing in that same area, social area, gathering space, would be about, the proposal would be about a 2,400 square foot space, so you could have about 342 people standing in a space like that. So it can serve various purposes, a properly sized gathering space for our social hall for a 375 seat worship space. So that's the graph you see down just below that. Is your current worship space sanctuary is about 2,700 square feet. We believe that based on needing to seat 375 people, that you would need about 4,200 square feet for worship. Okay, so right now you have 2,700. Thank you so much. So right now you have about 2,700 square feet, and we propose that you would need about 4,200 square feet for that. Okay. This is going to help tremendously. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so as a part of the worship space in the program, we've included a narthex, so it would be separate. Right now, today, you kind of use your social space as your narthex. So what we're proposing is that if you, in a perfect world, if you did the imagine if you did what if, that we'd have a separate narthex for the worship space, and then you'd also have the accessory. Narthex is an entry space before you go into a worship space. In addition to that, you'd have the proper size altar for music and performance. You'd have a cry room. You'd have the work sacristy, perhaps a meditation chapel, obviously storage. So all of those are elements of a worship space. Right now, you have about 5,000 square feet. We're projecting that you need to seat 375 in the worship space. We're projecting that you need about 8,400 square feet for that. For administration space, really you have a little bit more space today than in terms of just square footage, but obviously the house that is used for administration isn't designed for that. So we have a lot of spaces that are probably larger than they need to be, and then a lot of spaces that are kind of unusable for administrative space. So what we propose is we've looked at all of the office needs for what you have currently and for your future. We've looked at all those needs, and we propose that you need about 32 or 3,300 square feet of space for administrative needs. So that would be imagine if you had all the things that we talked about earlier. You had properly sized offices, conference rooms, you had work rooms, and so that's about the square footage you would need for that. All these things combine into what architects call a program of spaces. And then education space. We had a lot of great information by the education minister regarding what you have today and what the future needs are. And so we have a category for children's education, and we have a number of the spaces outlined that you would need for the children's education and the approximate square footage. And then we've done the same for adult education. So, and there we go. So we did the same for adult education. So we have that outlined also. So we've compared what you have existing versus what your needs are, and we project that you need about 6,300 square feet of adult education space, properly apportioned. And then as we looked at, so that's the four categories that we looked at, and then we looked at the possibility of workforce housing on the campus and what that might entail. And there's been some conversation prior to us, and so we've taken that information and determined that, gosh, if we had 1,200 square foot houses, townhouse type facilities, and we could, what would it be like to be able to have 12 on our campus, 12 townhouses that would be considered workforce housing, and so. That's about 14,400 square feet is what that entails. So if we combine that information, the information of your program needs, and we combine that with the information that we know about your site, and we combine that with parking. Parking is everything. I heard a presentation by the CEO of the Nashville airport, and he said everybody thinks that we fly planes. It's not about planes, it's about parking. And so they're in the parking business, not the plane business. Well, churches are very similar. You know, you've got to have the parking in order to have, if you build the parking, they will come, kind of thing. So in order to get people here, in order to have the proper number of spaces so that you can fill a worship space. So how do we calculate that? That's a great challenge. So one thing, zoning calculates it a totally different way than what reality is. Zoning says you only need one space for every 4 seats within a worship space. So if you can imagine, they think that every four of you is coming in one car, right? So anyway, that's not today's reality, but that's all. But the good thing is that's all that zoning requires. So you can share parking spaces very easily in that way. So in other words, they don't require churches to spend a whole lot on parking, on pavement, because if you are in a location where you can share parking, then that's all the better, right? Because you're typically, if you are sharing parking, you're using that parking at a different time than the shared partner. So, for example, if you shared parking with the YWCA, you'd be utilizing your parking at a different time. So then it's a matter of shuttle and that sort of thing, kind of coordinating that sort of thing. So, bottom line is, if we want 375 people, we need about 135 spaces for reality, which is about 2.5. And that, I think the 135 hits about 2.7 people per car, right? So then that gets you about 375 seats. So the good thing is that you have enough room on your campus to park to have that many spaces. So I'm going to show you 5 different options in a moment. They're going to kind of walk through, and all of them are kind of varied, and all of them, there's no one of these answers is the answer. But there are lots of different, it's showing you the potential for your property, and it's also showing you the potential for parking and for kind of answering all the questions in many different ways. So I'm going to walk you through some diagrams in just a moment that show that. So we anticipate, again, just kind of a summary here, we anticipate that if you have 135 parking spaces, that's about a parking space for every 2.6 or 2.7 people. So you could obviously have more than that, but that's kind of a good balancing act, especially if you want to kind of limit the amount of pavement you put down and then share parking with a neighbor. But that's all to be discussed further, the details of that. All right. You have, yes I do. You have 134 spaces today. So it's really what you need for 375. Now, so that's at 2.7. Some churches kind of lean toward two spaces per seat. Two spaces for, two people for every space, if that makes sense. So some churches kind of lean toward that, but with you all's proximity to other people, we think the 2.7 number and 2.5, in that zone is usually pretty practical for churches, is what we've found. And again, everybody's slightly different. We had a list of kind of general comments that we worked with throughout the programming stage. I'll just run down this list really quickly. It really ties to the images that I showed you earlier. Classroom spaces need to be bright, open, and cheery. Ideally, for ideal classroom space, they'd all be 500 square feet for all the classrooms. We didn't show that, but we did in our program. But we do show adequate classroom sizes in the program that we've created. Spaces must be flexible and suitable, close proximity to restrooms, and have maximized natural light and views. The worship space, we said that currently you see max out at about 250 here. The goal would be 375 per service. And 375, if we max out at 375, usually that's on the holidays. That's on the high holy days, if you will, so typically you consider capacity at 80% of that. So if we did 80% of 375, that's 300 people, okay, that you're seating on a day-to-day basis where you're not packed into the pews. Again, all these numbers can vary, but I'm just kind of giving you kind of an idea of how we've evaluated the program. And we wanted to provide for the children's choir a rehearsal space. Playground, the current playground is a little larger than needed and not really adjacent to the education space. And so having a playground that is adjacent would be very helpful. Parking, I think the original desire was to have 200. Our analysis showed that the 135 is about right. But if we could have more, obviously, the more parking spaces you have, the better. And then there's where we talk about the sharing of the spaces. Social hall, ideally, if the social hall is separate from the worship, that is a goal, and that it could possibly serve as indoor recreation space also. The workforce housing, those would be row house type spaces. The goal was 10 or 12, and as we started looking at the options, and that each residence might be 2 stories and about 600 square feet. Likely each would have 2 bedrooms, and we're required for parking for that is to have for each bedroom you have to have a parking space. So there would be, so if we had 12 houses, then we would need 24 parking spaces, right? And then the site. There is some kind of interesting aspects of your site, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So here's kind of all the technical stuff that, as architects, we look at first. So this is your site, and you can't see that really well, but your site, the white is the property boundary. The yellow are what architects call the building setback. So you can't build a building beyond that yellow line, but you can put parking beyond that yellow line. So just so you know that's what those the lines mean there. The black is differential between R20 and R40, which again don't really affect us because we're a church, but it's just for information. So part of your property is an R40 zone, and the other part is R20. The R40 is on the Woodmont side, and the R20 is on the back side, on the top side. The setback, I've forgotten the exact numbers. I believe they're on the I think they're about 30 or 45 feet on the 2 sides, on the 2 streets and the Woodmont side. I've forgotten the exact number, and then they're lesser against the side yards. Part of it is because you don't really have a backyard. You have 3 front yards, 3 streets, and so anyway, so that's part of the reason why that sets back that deep. So then this diagram, just a really quick diagram that kind of shows you every. You can't tell that at all. Tell anything from that. But there's some delineation there that basically shows you where the impervious surfaces are. In other words, where water doesn't go through. So it's roofs and parking, and that's what this diagram was showing. And then this diagram was kind of showing vegetation on the site, where the major tree areas of the site are. This is what we work with most importantly, and that is what architects call a survey. And so this is a topographic survey, and it's showing us a lot. You can't tell that from this information, but I'm going to walk you through a site analysis that we've done and tell you what this tells us. But basically, it's citing where the worship space is. It's to the left, where the administrative offices are, and then at the top is the education classrooms, okay? So this is like a site plan showing that. And it shows you your property boundaries and how we're bounded by Hopkins, Stokesmont, and Woodmont. Okay, so what we do when we look at that is we say, okay, what does all those lines mean? And what this shows, and what our analysis shows, is that one of the more striking things about the property is we have a stream that kind of runs through that, and that actually has the city has a right-of-way on either side of that. Okay, so and there's a stream that runs through, and at the back corner, in the top right corner, it's kind of goes to a what we call a head wall there, and it disappears underneath the parking lot. I don't know how we got away with that, but it does. So anyway, so we're assuming that if it does today, we can do that in the future. So anyway, but likely the city is going to be probably more concerned about that drainage area today than they would have been 10 years ago, than they would have been 20 years ago, right? So anyway, but what does that mean? That means that we have to have what architects call detention. So you have to have, when you have buildings on a site, you all have seen the large depressions in sites where they collect water in the case of a storm, and then they release it slowly. And they also filter the water that way before it goes into the drainage system. That's what that would all incur, and would occur in this stream area, or in the area that's in the center of the space, labeled Pocket Park. That would all kind of occur, could kind of occur in that zone. So what's very interesting about your property is the numbers that I have on the bottom corner that says 650. There's another number on the top right corner that says 610. There's 40 feet of drop in your property from one corner to the next. Well, that's a challenge for anyone, and so anyway, and it's the biggest challenge for parking, because you want parking to be on level, right? And so right now, you guys have masterfully kind of put parking on whatever slope of surface possible, and thus really doesn't meet any kind of code and isn't accessible. It works to park in, but that's about it. So anyway, and thus when you open your car door, it hits the next car, that sort of thing. So typically you want 5% slope on a parking lot, and then 2% slope for accessibility, for handicap accessibility. So what's interesting is along that line, that diagonal where the stream is, all of what architects call the grade lines run vertically. And so that's those lines that you're seeing there. Each one of those vertical lines indicates a 5-foot drop. And then on the other side of the stream, all the grade lines run horizontally. And so what does that tell us? I'm going to show you in a moment what that tells us, but it's really fascinating, a fascinatingly challenging site for that reason. So also we look at sun angles. You have mostly your southern sun is coming in here, so that gives you lots of natural light, and your northern light is coming in this way, so just in the way you're facing, and this shows kind of December 21st sunrise, and June 21st sunrise, and how that sun moves across the horizon and then moves across the sky from east to west. We also look at where the views are from the site, right? Really from the two corners, from Hopkins and the intersection of Hopkins and Woodmont, and then the intersection of Stokesmont and Woodmont. Those seem to be the most prominent view sheds into the site, which we think viewing of a church is pretty important. You want to see activity, you want to see that things are going on there. So those view sheds into the site are very, very important, as well as you know, view sheds out of the site, out into a park-like space. And then the ideal egress and ingress for automobiles is really from the side streets, and that's pretty much what you have, with the exception of the one location at the bottom right-hand corner where you have access directly onto Woodmont. But for the most part, you have existing accesses from the side streets. So that's the basics of the site analysis, and obviously we have to work with the building setback. So we know that, as we analyze the property, we know we can't put a building beyond those setback lines. And what we try to do with all of our work is just make sure that we follow all the rules, right? They've set up all these zoning rules, they've set up all the code rules, and really those are all for our safety and for a zoning that's been established for years. This is more of a detail of that map, and it's kind of emphasizing those vertical and horizontal grades, because as I mentioned, that's where the slope is. So everyone's kind of familiar within Nashville, there are ranch houses built on the side of a hill, right? And when they're always built, not against the grade, not perpendicular to the grade, but they follow the grade. And there's a reason for that, is because that's the easiest way to build, okay? But there are also, if you can imagine a ranch house built like that, you can imagine that sometimes the back, on the main level, the back of the house is underground, right? Because it's sitting into the side of the hill. And then the front of the house might be open so that you can access the outside, or vice versa. So that's what happens when you build on a horizontal. When you park, you want to park on grades, you want to follow the grade. So when the ideal parking on this site, and as we said, it's all about parking, right? So the ideal parking is when you have parking that is parallel to those lines, okay? And it's interesting that we've got that little stream that divides that, and we're trying to work with your natural grade. And the reason we have to work with your natural grade really is because you're bounded by 3 streets, and those grades on the streets aren't going to change, right? So the streets are there, and so we have to connect to those, and so that's why that is so important. So when we look at this analysis, then we say, okay, what are our options? And so the first thing we do is we take that program that I was talking about before, and we kind of create little boxes, for lack of a better word, and have boxes for each one of those elements that we've talked about: social, the gathering space, worship, education, administration, and then the workforce housing. So that's approximate footprints of those things. If you had those things all on one level, that would be the footprints of those elements. Now, what I'm going to show you in these diagrams, these elements are all stacked. So you're going to see one, and I'm going to kind of walk you through that. But one of the things one of the beauties of your site is because it does have a slope, we can do multi-level things on your site also. So that kind of gives you a sense of the. Let's see. Here we go. So this is the first layout diagram that I'm going to show you. And in this one, what we've done is we've taken your existing worship space, and I have a pointer somewhere. I'm going to grab that. It is not in there. Okay. Your existing worship space is, I'm going to step up here. Your existing worship space is right here. This is worship and social hall. So I'm standing right here, okay? So that's your existing space. And so what this diagram says is, and kind of vets I think a previous idea that, what if we just expand where we are? Can we do that? And that's what this diagram kind of shows. If you remember in the program, we said we had about 2,700 square feet. We need about 4,000, something like that. So anyway, this part right here would be new and expanded out this back wall. This is again, it's just a diagram. The details of it, we have no idea of at this point. But anyway, but if we needed the size space that you need, you would need that much space just for worship, okay? Just for worship, okay? And what's interesting about this space is that we enter on the survey. It says that we're at 42. But there are two or three level changes between where we enter at the social hall and here. So we're really standing at 35. And what that means is that there's 7 feet of difference between where we come in and to where we've dropped down, right? So anyway, so that's what these numbers are kind of indicating. That's your existing social hall area there, and then this is the worship space. And we're saying, well, if we wanted to add on to what you have here, what's one way you could do that? So we're proposing that you add to the back in this diagram, and then we stack the education and social. Those two elements are almost exact same, coincidentally, almost exact same square footage and need. So we could stack those because, as you know, the property drops down quite a bit here. So one of the things that we've shown in all of these diagrams, or almost all of them, is that again, I was talking about parking and how important parking is, and that we have a connection from Stokesmont to Hopkins, okay? We have a drive that interconnects those 2 streets, okay? So that drive is relatively steep, but it's no steeper than there's streets in the neighborhood that are that steep, right? But if we connected there, then we can follow those lines that we were talking about in the previous. We can follow those and get our parking all on level areas, relatively level areas. And what we would do is we terrace parking up to the worship space, and then we'd have, in this diagram, it's showing a full tray of parking on the west side. So if we tried to incorporate all of our needs all in this zone, we could have worship as it is today and add on. We could have education that might be a floor below. We have social that might be on that level that you enter on, and then administration could be on a 3rd level. So that's an option for adding on to this space, and kind of shows how it works within your existing footprint. We are showing in this diagram, we're showing removing a portion of the building, the existing social hall. And we do that, again, because it's all about parking, right? So we do that so that we can get a full tray of parking on this side. Then we're showing, so you remember that our stream kind of subdivides here, and so then the grades were running this way, so this parking would be running in trays this way. A tray of parking, 60 feet wide. And then what we're showing is that we have space in between that we can mitigate the slope, because we step up the hill all along there, okay? In this diagram also, we're showing the potential for workforce housing in the top left-hand corner. And that is showing 8 units just on that piece of property. So that's showing 8 units with parking around that. So that's one option, and I'm going to show you 4 others. But that's one option on what are the possibilities of the existing site. Can you do an addition here and leave that? Yes. Some of the pros and cons are what you probably experienced today. The parking lot that is up here is higher than our floor level. Not the best of situations for lots of things, drainage and that sort of thing. But just in terms of an entry sequence into the space, not the ideal. But can that be mitigated? Yes. So there's options within this space. This is showing the most parking that you'll see in any of the diagrams. This is showing about 172 spaces there. In this next diagram, we won't dwell on it much because I don't think it's an option you should consider, but we're showing it anyway. So anyway, this is not dissimilar to the other where we could use your existing footprint, or we could build new, where you see on the left-hand side the worship space, and then we have education and social might be stacked there, might be a two-story building there. The parking along the front would basically mean that from where we are today to the street would be paved. Don't recommend that. But it does show you kind of what typically would be done, if you just said we want to maximize parking, what typically would have been done. And you can see that in the back, even though we have that cross drive, just to do all of that work for the minimum number of spaces that are spaced out just doesn't work. So probably, and we're also limiting the park-like feel of the campus. So probably would not recommend pursuing that, but we thought it would be interesting to at least examine. Now this diagram shows something totally, a little bit, quite a bit different than what you have today. This is basically building to Woodmont to the building setback line. So there's some positives to that in that if we build to the building setback line, then we can maximize all of our parking back behind. And again, as you can see in this diagram, these parking trays step up the hill, and they're basically on that side of that stream. What we're showing here is that we could potentially have our worship space on this corner, with education possibly below, and we could have social and administration in this zone here. Our park would be more of a pocket park back behind, and then workforce housing could be on this corner. All of that would work with your existing grades. We could have parking access all the way around the perimeter, which we envisioned that being very minimal in terms of impact, to the appearance of the building and to its setting, but your park really becomes in the back of the property as opposed to looking across the park-like setting that you have today. So again, it's another option. This is showing 9 units of workforce housing, and it's showing all the programmed areas are shown here, in that we would have worship, social, administration down below, and then education down below worship. The beauty of locating a building in this way, this direction, is that we can take advantage of the hill. Okay, so what you want to do is if you stretch, we talked about how if you put a building with the grade, then one side of that building is likely underground, right? So if you put a building, if you stretch it out against the grade, then you have access for natural light all the way around, natural light and views all the way around where it projects out of the ground, if that makes sense. So if your hill's going down like this and we're projecting like this, you have the ability for each level to have views and to have views and natural light. So that's an important element in the design. So that is option 3. And again, in this option, we're looking at in the back, different than the first two, we're looking at the back left-hand corner of the property being all parking, converting to all parking. Total of 45 in that back corner. Oh, total 145 on the entire site. On this one, we thought we'd just mix it up a little bit and say, okay, what happens if we sell that property to actually gain some income, and then we invest the results of that sale into our property here. So again, this one is the first diagram. It's similar to the first diagram in that we're showing a full tray of parking here that kind of runs the full length of that street, and then the trays of parking step and follow the stream with a little connector drive there. So this is showing what if we take this side of the property, basically the Stokesmont Road corner, Stokesmont and Woodmont intersection. What if we take that and build there? Now that could be all one building, it can be multiple buildings. We have the ability, just like we had shown previously, but it stretches out further. We have the ability to be multi-level. It could be 2. I think we might even be able to get a third floor in that design. So in other words, at this end of the property, because our hill drops, we'd possibly be able to get a 3-story building in this zone, 2-story in this zone, and then a single story in this zone. So we were showing all the elements. What's interesting is that on this diagram, all of the elements that are in our program fit along that edge of property, right? And then in this diagram, we're showing that the workforce housing might be in this zone. Again, this is showing 9 units of workforce housing. That could expand a little bit into this green space, but then we're showing the green space, the park, and then the parking. In these diagrams, when we park up here at the highest level, we're able to come in on grade right here, so we never change grade. If you park in here in the middle level, then you can enter into the center. If you park here at the lower level, you enter on the lower part of the property. Oh yes, I'm sorry. So if we park in this zone right here, we can walk in on level, right? Because we are, and I've used some numbers over here to kind of give you a sense of it, but this floor level right here, architects use numbers to talk about levels. So this floor level could be 40 to 37, something like that. That floor level, and that's what this level of parking might be. The floor level in between, the in middle floor level, could be at I believe we have said 23, and so that's what this parking zone might be. And then this 23, and then the social space is 37, and then 23 down below that. So anyway, so the idea is that we can come from these parking zones into the building at various levels, right? Where is worship on that one? Worship would be on this corner. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, worship would be on that corner. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So worship could be on this corner, right here. Right here. Okay, so the worship space is about that amount of space, and then we'd have some social elements on that same level, right? And then down below that, we could have another, so the social doesn't quite fit all in that footprint, so we'd have some of the social elements, and there were a number of different elements that could be on another floor, so that might drop down to the second floor. We could have administration and education all in that bank. I'm going to show you a 3-dimensional diagram in a moment through that. But anyway, one of the thoughts was when we were working with the committee gosh, is there a way to kind of do that and then get workforce housing on this corner? So let me show you this diagram, and I think this has potential to be quite nice. But this kind of, yes. Mm-hmm. In this case, you'd be selling that lot, and I think it's probably quarter of an acre, around that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this diagram, what we're showing is workforce housing over to the left-hand corner. So again, it's in front of where this space is now, so it's more toward the street, showing workforce housing, and then we let that frame, let workforce housing and the worship and social education and administrative space kind of frame this pocket park. Okay, so we have the park that's in the middle, not dissimilar to kind of the park-like setting that you have today, and then we've tucked the parking back behind. Okay, so we have the parking all back behind, and then in this instance, we're showing parking in that lot. And again, these are all interchangeable, these ideas. But basically, what these ideas are showing you what the potential is, none of which are the solution, or none of which is the thing that you should do, but basically what the potential is of your site, and kind of showing that, wow, it has a lot of potential, is what we believe. And just its location, and even though with it has its challenges because of the hillside site, but probably if you're looking for a site somewhere else, you're going to have those types of challenges. Some challenges that we get into, or on another property now, we're having to bring sewer to it. You guys don't have that issue. We're having to let's see. So we're having to bring sewer, and then, which was a major expense. Oh, and then we had to get this property. It wasn't a church, but we had to get it rezoned and annexed into the city. You don't have those expenses. So that's the beauty of having a site that's so centrally located and has potential. Has potential within the existing confines, and has potential beyond that also. So that's what this diagram is illustrating. And this little section kind of shows you if we had worship space on the corner of Woodmont and Stokesmont, which would not be dissimilar. Those images that we showed you, we think we can recreate what you have here, and this is an awesome sacred space. And we think that we can recreate that. That could be on the corner. It still could be facing east, just like this space does. Could be on the corner, and so that's what that would be at that level. And then you could have an entry that's kind of in the middle, in between these buildings, that you might enter in on the middle level and go up an elevator to the worship space, because you'd enter flat from the parking. You could go up an elevator, and that's where the entry is shown there. You could have social to the left of this entry, and worship to the right. You'd enter on the level of education, so your parking would be, you'd be entering on level with parking into the education administration space. That's just one diagram of how that space could lay out. And you can see here that we even have, before we get to the bottom, to this corner down here that's shown in this diagram, before we get there, we even have a little bit more space. We believe with a little more study, we might even be able to get 3 levels there, which we can again consolidate your footprint, and then allow these to be individual buildings or the same building. We can all that is involved in kind of how you would ever want to phase such a thing, and that sort of thing. All of those things would kind of dictate whether it was a singular building, it was multiple buildings, that sort of thing, or whether if you phase it, it would be additions to a singular building. So in all of these diagrams, we have this diagram is showing 146 parking spaces. So we're gaining on what you have today. That's showing the 9 workforce housing units, and this diagram, more than any of them, maintains that stream, which will be very important to the city. That we maintain that stream and maintain in what we envision is this pocket park might be in some area of that could be retention, which is when you actually retain the water, and then it can become a water feature on your site. So you could do that within that pocket park, or it can be the detention, like detention, where it just delays the water from going out, and similar to the things that you see designed around town. But that could all be incorporated into the pocket park, and we envision the park being, you can crisscross that with sidewalks. The playground can be incorporated into that. Those types of things, playgrounds near the education space, those types of things, and this diagram kind of concentrates all those elements. It concentrates the park, concentrates the buildings, and then concentrates parking. So those are the five different diagrams, the 5 different ways, and some of them are obviously variations on a theme, but basically more to express that, we can work with your existing site to get parking that works. This is fully accessible, and that you have minimal car door banging, that sort of thing. Yes, sir. Garages are an option, but they're very, very expensive. And so we used to use a number of $10,000 per space is how much a parking garage costs. Now it's like $15,000 per space. It's just amazing how expensive they are. So that's why we tend to shy away from parking, especially if we don't have to. In an urban space, in a tighter site, you would definitely want to consider that. Not that we wouldn't want to consider, but that's the rule of thumb number that we use for parking in a garage. Yes, sir.
What happens to the columbarium in all these options?
With any of these options, we can move the columbarium. So we envision moving the if we're working within where the columbarium is, we would basically relocate that and give it a prominent space in the new design, wherever that would be, and that's very doable.
Could it be within the pocket park?
Oh, most definitely, and that's what our assumption would be, is that it would be there. Yes, ma'am?
If I understood correctly, you predicted or projected a worship space that was almost 3 times the square foot of the current.
Well, and when I said that square footage, that includes all of the accessory spaces that are involved in worship, and I can go back to that slide to talk to you about. But yes, so the actual, let me go back to that slide because I think here we go. Let's see.
Is that went from 2,000 and something to 8,000?
Yeah, right now you have about 2,700 square feet in this space. Okay, this worship space only, not
Just
that's not.
the sanctuary?
Yes, just the sanctuary. So what we're proposing is that you would need about 4,200 square feet or 375 seats. Okay.
Is that, I'm sure you were given data for that?
Yes. So our goal has been 375 because what we've looked at is that I guess what your experience is that when you get to a certain number of people, then it drops back down because you just don't have the capacity. And so having capacity has been the information I've had. Is having that capacity is very important in order to grow the congregation. So 375 has been the goal. Is it 350? Can it be? It may be something in between that, but 375 has been the goal of the committee. And so what we do is we take that 375 and we use a multiplier to get to that square footage number, and that's pretty universal in terms of number, seats and aisle space. So we use a multiplier to get to that, and so that's what gets us to the 4,200 square feet. And then we have 840 square feet. Again, it's a multiplier for the worship space. Then we have a cry room, work sacristy, a number of elements. They're all kind of listed there in a very crooked fashion. Sorry about that, but all listed there to add up to 8,400 square feet. You have about 5,000 square feet now. Okay, so we're not quite doubling the space, but the space would be if it's new, it can be more more apportioned correctly for your needs today. If it's renovated, we can do the same thing really. So if you took this space, if we took the space that is worship instead, and that was what the first diagram showed, you take the space that is worship and you just expand it, right? Then you can expand this space, and then your accessory spaces would need to be adjacent to that, right? The narthex and that sort of thing. And so laying out that would be what you would have to do in any design.
In that expanded space version, would you knock out this kitchen, for example?
Yes.
Or is it elsewhere?
Likely, yes. Because what we want to do is really get this kitchen associated more with the social hall as opposed to right now it's kind of on the level of worship, but you really need it at the social hall. Yes.
If you try to expand this space, we run into big difficulties having everything be within code, including these stone walls that are not reinforced.
Yes. So with an expansion, you have to absolutely love the space to take on that, and then we would have to bring it all up to code. Yes. And that's what I was kind of touching on. Kind of imagine if the windows just some pretty straightforward things. The windows are all stopped into the stone. It works great in Arizona, not so much in Nashville. And they're all single pane windows, and so swapping those out it can be done. Don't get me wrong, it can be done. You have to love doing that. And what I think you could go either way. That's the beauty of it. You can go either way. But by just showing you the images, walls that are here may be part of Civil War. So that and what we would envision is that we're keeping that as part of Pocket Park, and most all the diagrams were maintaining that anyway. So to me, I think that's an asset, another asset, and I think we enhance that. We kind of make that asset work even better for you, right? So we would keep those things. But other than that, there's not really a historical thing that I know of on the property.
I see that this, like the corner of this is the laundry facility, and I think that's a super idea. Okay, never mind, I see shower facility, so all
Yes.
of these plans would include, because one of the
Yes.
benefits, the few benefits of Morgan House is that it does offer showers. which is
Yes.
welcome, I guess.
Yes, and that's what we've included in the program to be able to do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so all five of these had workforce housing. So I'm not sure if this is part of the discussion, but none of them suggested not having workforce. So can you explain the rationale and the purpose and the advantage or disadvantage of workforce housing and what workforce housing means?
I will jump into, because that was just, I think, so the first question I had that I feel like has been well answered for me is that if we wanted to be significantly bigger, would we fit, and could we even fit other stuff? And the answer that I've heard from that is definitely yes. And so one of the things that we added these largely as challenges to see if you could answer this question. So yes, we could fit something like workforce housing. Yes, we could fit with a number of 375. You know, we threw those numbers out, but those are things that as we go forward, we can talk about rather, you know, what can we afford? Can we afford it?
We can almost take out the workforce housing. That was.
Exactly. This was us trying to figure out if it's something that is feasible for us to stay here. If we decided that's something we absolutely wanted to do, and Tom said you can't fit it, then we'd be talking about moving. I don't know if you'd be willing to talk a little bit more about the workforce housing briefly, but I'm wondering if you would go with that.
Yeah. So it's something that the task force had talked about as another part of our mission as a church that we might be able to offer to Green Hills and the larger Nashville community. Workforce housing is sorely needed in Nashville, especially in this area.
You mean affordable housing?
No, so there's a difference there. These are guidelines put out by the Housing and Urban Development Department. Workforce housing is 80% of median income for a family of 4, which in this case, I don't remember details, it's in the $60,000 a year range. These are teachers, firefighters, police officers, and staff at UU who have to live very, very far away and commute long distances in order to get here, to work here. So as Jacob mentioned, this is something that we could absolutely remove from the plan. But we thought it a provocative way to throw something into the plan that would add another kind of manifestation of our mission as a church. There's a lot more details that we can talk about there. We probably don't need to get into all of those now, but it's an idea.
And it's an income generator.
It can potentially be an income generator. Absolutely. Other UUs around the country have done things similar that help to generate income, which is not bad.
All right. Thank you. I bet there's more questions.
My understanding from years and years past is that it's less expensive to build layers, separate floors, rather than spreading out. So with our elevation, this situation here, is it going to be more economical to do the plans that would have the different levels rather than 3 separate or 4 separate areas?
Most definitely with your site, because it's the hillside site. Oh, the question was, is it better to build, you know, multi-floor as opposed to spreading out? And
For financing.
for financial reasons. And on this site in particular, most definitely, because it has such a slope, such a hillside site. And you don't really think of it that way, I'm sure, when you're here, but because it is a hillside site, it does make much more sense to build up. Because when you build out, you've got to flatten that much more area of land, which means means retaining walls, that sort of thing. So if you can build in to the side of the hill, that's what we're proposing along. So we're proposing that you're actually building where you have the most drop in your, and that is so that we can get multi-story, and not only get multi-story, but on the Woodmont end, you know, it would look, you know, just like this, you know, because you'd only have the worship, but on the Stokesmont end, it's taller, the building's taller, right? So as it flows down the street, the building becomes taller because we're stacking up. So yes, that, yes, ma'am.
I'm going to ask that you speak at the podium
Okay.
at this point, even though, because you're not necessarily, and I'm going to ask Rudy to bring so that we can hear the question. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, back here.
This may be out of scope, but I'm confused by the comment about moving the columbarium because ashes are buried directly in the ground. So if somebody could just answer that, that'd be great.
I would like him to answer that, but I also know they had the exact same kind of columbarium at the Oak Ridge Church, and they did move it and successfully. And it took some time. We have our map, and they had to dig down a certain depth and be very careful. But they were able to move it exactly knowing where every ash was. So I just want you to know that made me feel good knowing that they could do that.
Other way, other way.
Right, this way. Right. Yeah.
I know in this particular location, we've had a lot of issues with down because of all the spring issues. And one of these pictures had the building directly over where the parking lot is now, where they said, you know, that there's, the stream really doesn't end, it sort of goes underneath the parking lot. So my question is, if you build there, what do you do to accommodate what you will find when you dig up the parking lot? And how does the building get protected against the elements there?
That's a great question, and it's really more of a detailed question that we would be looking at as we got further down the road. But we would definitely have civil engineers involved that would help us with that design. Any design that we do would have waterproofing. We're not anticipating having just in that section that I showed you. We weren't anticipating having a building that's on that level, you know, on the grade level there. So I'll use my numbers again. You enter in. Yeah, so you're building up over. So you enter in at 10. I think the lowest level we were showing was something like 18 or something in the diagram. So you're actually 8 feet above that level. So we'd be building above that, but we would likely reroute that water and pipe that water if we did that. So there are ways to kind of accomplish that, but that obviously would be much further in the design when we did that.
In all these plans, the greatest amount of acreage that we part with is a quarter. Is that the largest that we part with?
That's correct. And that's largely because of the parking.
And do you know the market value approximately of that quarter?
I do not know that. That's something that we can find out pretty readily, yes, but I do not know what that would be.
I have a question about the first diagram with the expansion. Would we be able to use the sanctuary? I mean, I know this is a hypothetical, but in some part of that, would we still be able to worship here, or would we have to pretty much shut down worship in this space to accommodate that?
More than likely, you would have to shut down, just honestly. Yes, if we weren't addressing, because with an expansion, we'll be addressing all the other existing issues, right? So the existing structural issues, the existing window issues, the heating and cooling, we'd be addressing all those. So more than likely, you'd be not in this space. And that's the beauty of some of the other plans. If you went in that direction, is that you could build new worship space while you're in this worship space, right? And then shift to that, and then you could plan the expansion and plan the site work such that you could stay here while that new space is being built.
Sure. And I just had one other comment, not a question. So like where the playground is, there's actually a spring that comes out from underneath the playground.
Yes.
The stream actually goes dry a lot of the year, but it picks up where our playground currently is. And they're there are like salamanders and stuff that live in the stream. Would we have to like get some kind of survey done to make sure that what we're doing is not causing a problem with that?
The state has certain, and we just have to see if this stream is on their list. They have certain streams that are called blue water streams, I believe, and then those are the ones that are protected. We have to see if this is identified as one of those. Even if it's not protected, we're going to want to maintain that, and because we have the easement, we pretty much have to maintain it. So anything that we did to modify that, we would have to get the approval of not only the state of Tennessee but Metro Water.
And another quick question: no matter what any of these five is going to be, there's going to be some we're going to be putting some carbon into the atmosphere. Do you have a sense what might be the least carbon impact and what would be the most carbon impact of the five?
That's a great question. I would think they're all at this point, they're all pretty equal, would be my gut sense. Just because of the amount of work that will need to happen if we renovate and use the same. Really, that's the difference between, because what we've done is that every diagram has the same footprint, the same square footage. So every diagram is the same in that regard. And so I would think it's really just about the difference between renovation and new, and my guess is it's about the same.
Did you put up the design where the quarter was sold?
Yes. That's this diagram. And just as I said previously, that could happen with almost any diagram. So that we just depicted it in this one. But that shows still the idea of the connecting drive, and then parking off of that.
The parking itself, where you're showing the dividers, would that have trees? I know that's probably
Yes.
optional for the church, but I would like to, know about that.
Yeah, we would envision that those all have slopes, right? Because that's where we're terracing, what architects would call terracing down the hill. So that would have slopes, and yes, we would envision that would be trees and planted. So it really becomes, the idea would be that we're identifying this space as pocket park, but the idea is that it's going to look less like a parking lot and less like just paving everywhere. That's the beauty of having to step down the hill, is because you're kind of required to have those green spaces in between to terrace it down, and so have green space incorporated into the parking area.
Thank you. And one other point, I don't know if you were informed, but you might want to know that there are certain trees on the property that were given in memoriam, and they're named for people. And you might not be able to move the tree, but I don't want you to get blindsided by that, and you should know that maybe other trees should be replanted and labeled correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be great to ultimately know what those trees, which ones those are, see if those could be salvaged, or if we have to replace them, then you just make sure that memorial goes to a new tree.
This may be a little technical, but what generically would be the difference between LED design and semi design, or none?
Okay, so LEED certified design is really now, in the beauty of where we are today versus where we would have been 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, is that most everything that's required for a LEED certified project is incorporated now into code. So we have to meet certain energy requirements for the HVAC, for lighting, for all of the design. And so that is pretty much incorporated into the code. So if there's a desire, what we found is that some companies, mainly companies is what we found, still need to have that plaque on the wall that says that we're LEED Platinum or LEED Gold. Schools are another entity that need to have that. And so if there's a need to have that, then we go through basically the paperwork to obtain that. But most every building we design now is a LEED Silver, which is the second layer, just below gold. And code kind of requires you to design buildings to the LEED Silver, kind of LEED Gold range. So we would be doing that whether you got that certification or not. The certification is costly and a lot of paperwork, but it does let you say that you've got a LEED certified building. What we always do with our designs is, because terms of green energy and the environment. It's kind of a natural thing that we do. So we always say that it's built with lead principles in mind, but might not necessarily have to apply.
The road that runs around the edge, is that parallel parking along there? Is that
Yes,
drop off?
so yes, that's what we had envisioned. That has very little impact on the front elevation end, but it does allow you to get access to every level, and it's an option. But what we're illustrating here in this for example is that we have just kind of it could be a 1 or 2 lane drive, and then it's parallel parking around the edge, and that's just to be able to easily access for handicap accessibility and that sort of thing. Easily access the building since parking is somewhat remote. But again, at each level we'd be entering on level of the church, so you could basically walk flat. That's the concept anyway. You would walk flat into the church building, into the building at any point.
And then assuming we had housing of some kind on the property, how many parking spaces are you assuming?
So yes, so in this one where we have 9 units, we would have to have 18 parking spaces.
Where would they go, for example, on that?
So really the parking we haven't kind of identified what would be the workforce housing parking on these diagrams, but it kind of makes sense that they might be in this zone or this zone, something like that, and those would probably be just kind of identified. Yes, but those are counted into those numbers. Yes.
Because of the terracing that you referred to for that parking lot,
Yes.
is it possible that you can use some type of a semi-permeable surface on that rather than just asphalt?
Yes, and in fact, the terracing area, we would envision that is permeable. So that would be landscape, ground cover or something like that would be on there. Something that would be low maintenance, but something that would be there forever. Our low maintenance ground cover of choice is variety, because you cannot do anything to kill that stuff, and it can look beautiful and all kind of very much like a lawn. You cut it once a year, and that holds a slope. So, but there are lots of different plant material that could be on the slope part. Then on the parking part, that can also be permeable. We've had various success with permeable concrete, which that tends to get clogged up. So typically you use permeable pavers, which is a little more costly. So that's what you get into, is the balance of cost versus practicality in the permeable paving. But yes, the slope areas we envision those would be green spaces, and they would be fully permeable.
Our question is, it seems like there's a lot of pavement there and it's all going down toward the building. What impact does that have on drainage? And my second question is, does it have to be paved? Are there any options besides asphalt for parking, and what impact does that have on the cost?
Yes. So yes. So what this diagram is depicting is that these lots are level, but yes, they do terrace down, and in this case they're terracing down in this direction. So because of the stream and because of the park and everything and the way the site is, we envision that the water from this would be captured here, and then it would be dispersed. In terms of paving, and again, that's preconception. We would have to get much deeper into design to actually know that. But for example, this drive is sloping down also. It's sloping down from Woodmont down to here. So it slopes down about 20 feet from here to here. Okay, so we're thinking that most of that the water that is here is coming down here, and it will have to be captured in drains and taken underground and then released. In terms of paving, yes, there are a number of options for permeable paving. As I just mentioned, you can get permeable concrete, which is, you've probably seen that more times than not. We use that in the parking spaces only and not in the drive aisles. But that has a tendency over time to get clogged, so it doesn't have the lasting effect that other permeable surfaces will have. But it is the most cost effective. So then you do permeable brick pavers and that sort of thing. That's more expensive, but is more lasting in terms of its use. But yes, there are different options that we can use for paving, and you can do that in just areas too. Like for example, you could do the permeable concrete in the parking tray, and then the drive aisles can be paved. We've done those combinations before. Sir?
And just looking a few steps ahead, is it possible to get each one of these diagram options presented with the cost and the implications for getting raising the money to meet that cost?
Most definitely, most definitely. We haven't discussed costs or anything just yet with the committee, so we haven't gotten to that point yet. But what we would do is we would take the square footage basically, and square footage of the building. We'd have a multiplier. The multiplier is slightly different than in a worship space than as you can imagine because of the level of finishes and everything than it would be for education space and social space. So we would have various multipliers for the square footage at this stage of the game. And then we would also have a multiplier for the site work. And again, it kind of depends on which project, but pretty much for each one of them, it would likely be in the same kind of range because we're affecting the same parking and we're really affecting the same space. I think my gut sense is if you renovate this space versus new, it could be a wash, or it actually could be slightly more expensive to renovate. So the costs are all going to be, in all the diagrams, because we're dealing with the same square footage, probably all be about the same. How they're phased is probably the other element of that is that, can we show what the cost would be for just worship, and can we show what the cost would be for just the social improvements, that sort of thing. We can do that too. It's all about that square footage number and then the cost that we attach to the square footage or the cost range that we do. Yes, but we can definitely do that.
I'm wondering how much there might be asbestos or something else that would be affecting renovation and or tear down cost.
Right. I am not certain whether there have been asbestos surveys or not. That is a whole lot easier to kind of handle today than it used to be. So there is a cost associated, but it's not usually, our experience has been, it's not usually in the whole scheme of a project, not a big cost number. And it's just something that they have to do on the front end before you can begin any construction. We run into it all the time with renovations, whether it's the glue that's on the underside of a tile and you're disturbing that or whatever. So asbestos seems to be able to be hidden in lots of little places that you wouldn't think about. But I don't know that there's been a survey of the existing properties, but it's something we can certainly handle. Yes.
This may be a question that Jake can answer, or somebody on the committee. What's the seating capacity that we have right now?
I think it was right at 200. Yeah, I think we were right at, this said 250 with a question mark. I think we were right at 200 as the capacity here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Tom, thank you very much. We gave you a challenge, and you really came through for us. So I think a lot of folks were asking if we were bringing sledgehammers to this meeting. Some people are really excited, some people ready to protest, and so I think you've given us some clear answers to some of the questions that we've asked of you, and you've given us a lot of other questions that we need to ask of ourselves, and I really appreciate that. Excited.
Jacob, is this presentation going to be available on the website or somewhere that we can read it without having to? Yes.
We will work out the easiest way to make it, we're not sure we want it out without feedback, but we will make it available to people, and that's something
Even if it's just at the meetings that are coming up.
Yeah, exactly. They will definitely